you mentioned, Duane, about longevity. I don't want it to keep you too long. I really wanted to ask you about brain health, because I've heard you talk about it in a couple of interviews, and this is one of my personal biggest interests. I've always wanted to ask an MMA coach about whether do people do things to protect the brain from not concussions but just slight brain damage. So, for example, there are some medications I've come across, because my main research interest area is like neuroprotection, avoiding dementia, neurodegenerative disease. And so there are some things like, for example, I don't know if you know this, Duane, but if you block adrenaline, we're using a short-acting adrenaline blocker for 6 to 8 hours, you can dramatically lessen the damage from an impact to the head. The long-term damage, dramatically. And these things are called beta blockers. They're given to snipers, for example, when they're in war to steady their hands from the adrenaline. They're also given to public speakers. Totally harmless. Actually, they're one of the most life-saving medications in cardiovascular disease. But usually they give them to people all the week because they have high adrenaline. What I do with some of my strength athletes is after their hardest workout of the week, to improve their recovery, they just take one beta blocker after the workout. Right after the workout, they take it, block adrenaline for a few hours, because adrenaline also limits healing because of inflammation. Stuff like that. But most importantly, adrenaline really worsens the damage to the brain. Like if I had athletes, every time they'd spar, like say they spar 3 times a week, I'd say those 3 days a week, take just one beta blocker right afterwards. Slow the adrenaline system for 6 hours. It'll limit it a little bit, but there's so many other options. Like we talked about cerebrolysin before. There's a drug called sodium valproate, which is very powerful at being neuroprotective acutely. I'm curious, what do people do? And do you think there's room to expand? Because I really think that a lot of brains could be saved early on.
Well, I was unaware that these beta blockers can actually help reduce adrenaline, which would actually correlate to
dramatically.
Yes, I didn't know that. So right there, that's got to be shared more. That's nice. But the way I choose to develop my athletes, I mean, there's 2 things that need to happen. One, they need to improve in many categories, and they need to be safe, healthy, and happy for the fight, whether they're actual fighter or a civilian, right? So I don't have my guys do hard sparring. They'll hard spar once a week because that needs to happen if they're going to compete. But we do a whole bunch of sparring drills and Dutch drills. So just like you see wrestlers drill, same concept, just with striking scenarios. So yes, I can say up until TJ's last fight where he received a head cut, where he had to postpone a fight, none of my fighters ever had to pull out of a fight because of injury until just recently.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I was going to ask you about that also, how often people should spar and stuff like that long term, but
It once a week, hard sparring. It doesn't have to be full power, but high intensity, because you're going to get tired and have the adrenaline to be able to control that, right? So be able to, what does he say? Stress management, and be able to still implement your game plan. But sparring drills, every day sparring drills should happen, which is how I run my classes.
I would be remiss, Duane, if I didn't ask you before we let you go, because I really enjoyed talking to you, and I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I would be remiss because my channel focuses a lot on, because we do strength sports, we talk about PEDs a lot. I wanted to ask in MMA a couple of general questions, like, do you think that PED use is actually widespread in post-USADA UFC? But
I bet you half of these people are freaking taking stuff for sure. Okay, I know. I remember like most of my fights, and I'd get into the clinch, and they'd feel fucking solid. And I'm like, man, these guys are strong. And I used to think, well, if they let go of me, I'm going to knock them out. So they're fighting for their life. Maybe that's why they're so strong. And then I would say more than half of these people are doing steroids for sure, PEDs, whatever, doing some stuff that maybe they should or shouldn't be doing. So, or maybe I should have just took some stuff. They would be like, yeah, boy, let's do it. So, who knows? Right?
But Duane, do they have like chemists working for them that design like unique, because WADA only tests a certain amount of chemicals. And I imagine that if you had a cool chemist with you, he could slightly change a molecule, make sure none of the metabolites of that molecule are tested.
What's funny is I found an individual, Thomas Denny in Hawaii, and I knew the guy he was buying stuff from. So I knew he was on some stuff. And I think back then, I don't think fighters were making enough money to have a personal pharmacist or what was it?
Yeah, like a chemist. Yeah.
A chemist in their back pocket or access to that, or maybe there's just more. Maybe it's not as expensive as I think it would be. I don't know. I think like high level, like people who are getting paid a couple $100,000 or whatever, if they have the money, it's a human inclination to want to be their best performance. And if you could take something to perform better, I'm sure that's why people are doing it. Like, man, I'm so good, but I could be a little bit better. So, I mean, I get it, but still, that's still another form of discipline to be an honest competitor as well. So, I guess it just depends on who believes honesty or what definition you abide by with that. I'm pretty sure some people are having custom stuff made that's not getting flagged.
Interesting. Okay. I'm so glad I heard you say that.
There's a gym.
Yeah. Shit.
Duane will know. I'm not going to say the name online, but very famous gym in California that years ago now, I don't know, because I'm out of that scene. Years ago, they had a chemist on staff and worked with some of the biggest names in the end. They had a chemist on staff, and this guy would come in the room with a duffel bag. And this is back when IVs were still legal, and he'd be just lining athletes up like it was like an infirmary, like a makeshift, medic, on the battlefield. He'd be lining their athletes up and just running lines. And one of the athletes I was working with knew a fighter on their team, and they were talking about having this guy set him up with an IV. And I was like, no, fuck no, because you don't know what is this? And he would have all his concoctions, literally running lines with his special mixtures, putting them into the IVs and loading these athletes up. I'll say it offline because, liability and whatnot, to be fair. But yes, some of these teams, for sure. Nowadays, who knows? It's a lot more closed door because the USADA is here, thankfully, and they cleaned up a lot of it. But if you really step back and look around, you know exactly who's doing what.
Well,
I do nutritional IVs, or nutritional vitamin IVs or whatever, the Myers cocktail IVs. And I have a good relationship with the people that we go to, and I'll have them come to the dojo sometimes in a van. So we'll have 4 or 5, sometimes 10 people in the dojo lined up on IVs. It looks like a freaking medic ward. Yeah, it's hilarious. But yeah, part of the same scenario that you've seen at the gym. Yeah.
By the way, do you do choline and L-carnitine IV? Because that's a great idea, by the way.
I do the Myers cocktail. I'm not even quite sure what the hell's in it. It looks like a fucking bag of Mountain Dew. That's
you can make it a little bit better. I have some cool ideas actually for that.
I need to put some beta blockers in there.
I have many ideas for you on that.
Here, I'm trying to save my brain.